Hi, everybody. Welcome to a brand new segment of Inclusion Unlimited. I'm Leslie Mouton, the Creative Media Director for Morgan's. Now, I know Texas Tamales sounds like a delicious local favorite, but it's actually also an acronym for the Texas Assistive Technology Makers Alliance. This group looks to create a statewide network of makers and connect them to the adaptive technology needs of their community. To talk more about this endeavor, founder Shannon Paige joins intern Emma Siebold in the studio via Zoom for an interview. Take a look.
I'm very excited to be joined by Shannon Paige in the studio today. Shannon is the Education Project Manager for the Texas Technology Access Program and also the founder of Texas Tamales, which is the Texas Assistive Technology Makers Alliance. Thank you again, Shannon, for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Awesome. So to start off, before getting into tamales, you have a really extensive background being a Navy veteran, being a speech pathologist, and now getting into assistive technology. Will you kind of talk about how your experiences got you from there to where you are now?
The Navy, I think, is a phenomenal experience because it teaches you, once again, to work as a team. Mm-hmm. And I think anytime we're servicing individuals with disabilities, whether they're little all the way to adults, you really need that team mentality, and that team includes the individual with a disability and every team member that has a position supporting that individual. But the ultimate final decision should be the individual with a disability if they're old enough and their family and caretakers. And it's really having that ultimate goal of maximizing potential and maximizing autonomy and independence. And that's what we do. And so when I left the Navy and I was married and had 2 children, I realized that I needed something more. And I went back to school to become a speech language pathologist. And within 2 years, I had 2 students on my caseload, both needing augmentative and alternative communication. And their needs were very different. I pushed forward learning how to use augmentative and alternative communication. And so I started getting asked to help other people. And if you see one individual that uses augmentative and alternative communication, you've seen one individual, because everybody's needs, interests, strengths, weaknesses are all different. Just as you and I would have differences, we need to offer that same autonomy to our clients. Mm-hmm. So that we're growing them, we're helping them reach their own capacity based on where they are and where they need to go.
And now you've got a switch adapted toy for under $5. And the idea is I want kids to have a lot of opportunities. That clearance after Halloween. This one, these buttons are now switch adapt or 3D printed. Okay. This button here costs $60 to $70. This one I 3D printed and put together 2 little soldering dots for under $5.
And then as you start to work with augmentative and alternative communication, you realize that it's not just that communication tool, but you've got to have your low-tech options, and you've got to have access, and you've got to have lighting. And so there's so much more that you've got to have backups for when the device goes down. So I think people kind of get stuck on it's just one tool, when in fact it's a system. You're creating, whether it's communication, whether it's access, you're creating systems of assistive technology to really support individual autonomy. And that's kind of where I started. And then the tamales kind of moved forward from there. The concept of the tamales is really building communities of makers that support individuals' personal preferences and needs.
Yeah, and you mentioned that system that's, beyond just the devices and the technology itself. Is TTAP kind of an example of that system?
We are only a very small, I look at us more as a connector, as a part of that system. Gotcha. Because we're really a team of 5. And so TTAP, we're helping to educate, we're helping to create those systems, but we're almost more of a connector and a trainer so that we can build those systems.
Yeah, and who are you trying to kind of make the curators of those systems then? Is that school districts? Is that communities? Who is that for?
And both. Because when you have cities like Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth, you have more resources, but I think people aren't as connected. And so in those cases, we're looking at libraries, we're looking at school districts because they're large enough to have CTE programs and STEM programs and AT specialists. But the problem with these large systems is they've got a lot of resources, but they're not connected. And so we really have to work hard at connecting those. And then we work in smaller communities where there's, if you can get in touch with her, it's Leslie Cannon at Waco ISD Middle School. And she's actually created a group of middle school students that were doing a little bit of robotics, and they're starting their 3D printing. And she said, we've got to go beyond teaching these kids to print poop emojis. We really need to help them become members of that system. And so she had the students reach out and do some research on what they could actually make. And they made tools for musicians, and then they went into some nursing homes. And they're hoping to be able to have a website by next year where people from the community can reach out, and they'll be printing simple tools like water bottle openers or zipper pulls, things that people might need so that they're working as part of that system. When we get started with a child and we want cause effect, kids get cause effect really quick. So we want cause effect in place. So that Bluey that just sings one song is going to help you learn where we need to place the switch and teach the child that they have control over something else. But I always say, let's give them 10 trials on any one toy and let's switch it up so that they're also learning different sounds, learning different experiences, learning different movements. And then we're going to shape those movements into getting them onto a computer or getting them onto gaming so that then we can get them into literacy, which will then lead to future jobs. So we always have to keep the end in mind. It seems like we're just making a toy, but let's have a purpose for the toy.
And I think you mentioned to me kind of seeing these systems in play, getting 3D printers into schools, into programs like that, is that the organizations and groups that are printing the designs and printing the technologies are now having reasons to engage with some individuals with disabilities that they weren't previously, and kind of seeing the problems helps them create the solutions. Is that something you've seen, right?
And that is a great point, because remember, we're talking about systems. And so when HISD is a good example. So we got Booker T. Washington. We got a young man at Booker T. Washington. And what he did is he created a proximity switch for a student who had cerebral palsy. And this proximity switch allowed for the student with cerebral palsy to use his head and basically hit a light so that when he needed to raise his hand, instead of raising his hand or that physical movement, he had a means to get the teacher's attention. Well, this student at Booker T. Washington had said, up until this point that he had this project, he had never met anyone with a disability before. Because you think about some of these kids who are in these gifted and talented classes, they are, they're kind of at the top of their class, they're doing the engineering, the robotics, they're getting extra opportunities. And because of that, they're almost isolated from the kids with disabilities, when in fact, you still need those relationships. And so one of the things that came out of that program, and any of the research that you see when you've got these students participating in these programs, the unintended consequences are always the relationships, which benefits both sides. And so the gentleman from Booker T. Washington actually said, I had never met anyone with a disability before, and now I want to go into rehab engineering. So that relationship empowered him to start thinking about individuals with disabilities as people instead of that group down the hall that you never have access to. And it's those relationships of seeing this individual as a person and seeing that they have feelings and that we can actually have that relationship is what both sides need. It's a win-win for both.
And then someone did mention, though, on the flip side, that a lot of stuff happening in the makerspace is happening in a silo. Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
So you've got maker spaces, and you've got people jumping on bandwagons, and I think bandwagons are good to get ideas, but then you've got to make sure that you've got a purpose on why you're jumping on. And so 3D printers during the pandemic, they came out right before the pandemic, and the technology is just growing daily, and the 3D printers are becoming more affordable, and the things that you can print are becoming better quality. I can now print a switch for under $10, usually actually under about $5, and put it together for something I used to have to pay $70 for. So these maker groups are getting 3D printers, but they really don't have a purpose, a functional purpose for them. And so you get, what I hear is we go to the library, and the library's got this maker space, and the kids all made all of these fidgets, and fidgets are great, but you can only have so many fidgets. But if we start giving kids a purpose for this maker, this fabrication technology, and they can actually do something, these kids feel empowered. They don't know what they don't know, but when they know it, they take the ball and run with it, and it's really cool to see. So right now, you've got a lot of silos. You've got a lot of STEM programs where we're jumping on and we're getting these 3D printers, but we're not, and then we're joining the robotics club, and robotics is huge. But what if we can take these robotics and actually use it to make a tool that can, well, a good example is the Obi feeder robot, where that's had to start out with an idea somewhere. And that robotic technology, it could be where someone could use it to grab a tissue and bring it over to them so that they don't have to rely on somebody else. I think in another 5 years, you're going to see this robotics technology grow. What if we give these kids real world challenges? And so that helps them move out of that silo, and it helps them work with someone with that disability. And then it helps you come up with common goals. Goals are what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And then
Meaningful goals.
Yeah.
Meaningful goals.
And then speaking of goals, finally, what are some end goals you have for Tamales? I know that's still pretty young.
Ultimately, if I had my way, I would have Texas Education Agency have an actual assistive technology strand in their STEM and CTE programs, meaning it's just one more thing that kids can specialize in, because kids just don't even know it's a thing. And that helps them in any field that they're in. If they can start learning about accessibility because they've actually done a project to help someone get a toy in a classroom or out on a field, they're going to start thinking about that for the rest of their lives. So any field that they go into, even if it were architecture or even as a fireman, whatever they do in their future, they're never going to forget those relationships and those things that they've created that help someone else. And it's just going to be how they think in the future.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you, Shannon. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome.
That is fascinating and absolutely fantastic. I just love it. Hey, thank you everybody so much for joining. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.